Oh yes, it's great to be an engine and go steaming along, a puff, puff, puffing along, a peep, peep, peeping along, all the people waving as you speed along, a puff, puff, puffing along all day.
It was a splendid morning on the island of Sodor. James was feeling very pleased with himself. His red paint gleamed in the sunshine as he sped along the line. He reached the junction just as Percy puffed in with some freight cars. James was surprised to see him.
What are you doing here, Percy? You should be at the station by now.
I know, sighed Percy. These cars have been troublesome all morning.
That's no excuse, Percy. Nothing should stop us. Sir Topham Hatt relies on us to be on time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be on my way.
And James puffed importantly away. Bossy buffers, muttered Percy. James arrived at the harbor. It was market day. The harbor yard was filled with the sweet smell of fruit from faraway lands. The fruit was delivered in big ships. James watched as strawberries, oranges, melons, and bananas were carefully loaded onto his cars. Then he set off for the station on the main line. On the way, he met Thomas.
Really reliable, that's me,
panted James.
Pity the same can't be said for Percy. Goodbye.
What was all that about? Gasped Annie and Clarabelle. That was trouble. Trouble for James. Just wait and see. Percy was back in the yard and busy shunting. He had the cars in good order and was making up for lost time. But the station master had bad news.
What's happened?
Asked Percy's driver.
James's brakes have jammed. We need Percy's help right away.
Percy quickly set off to the rescue. James was stuck on the line and looking glum. Percy couldn't help laughing.
Got yourself in a bit of a jam, eh, James? A sticky situation? Be quiet. It's not funny having jammed brakes.
And not very reliable either. I'm surprised you let it happen, James. Nothing should stop us engines.
That's enough, Percy, said the driver. Can you push these cars?
Of course I can. There's no time to lose. James has done too much of that already. James angrily hissed steam as Percy was coupled to the cars. Off we go, said Percy. I'll have to go fast to get there in time. Those big engines are so unreliable.
Be careful, Percy,
called his driver, but Percy was in a hurry. He didn't see that the switch had failed and that he had been diverted into a siding.
Look out, Percy,
shouted his driver and applied the brakes, but it was too late. The driver and fireman had jumped clear, but squashed fruit squirted all over Percy. Sir Topham Hatt arrived.
Percy, you are not to blame for the switch failure, but I do not run a jam factory.
Yes, sir. No, sir. And Percy squelched sadly away. That night, the shed was silent. James and Percy felt very sorry for themselves. At last, Thomas spoke. You know, he said to no engine in particular, there's more than one way to get jammed. We all learned that today. Still, there was silence. What's more, we also learned that sometimes when engines help each other out of a jam, things can still go wrong. So, said a voice, so that means we learned a lot today, and therefore... Then came a chorus. We're really useful engines after all.
We're all so proud to be famous engines and travel through the countryside. We're always brave when there's hills to climb. No mountain is too high.
It was a beautiful morning on the island of Sodor. Thomas the Tank Engine's blue paint sparkled in the sunshine as he puffed happily along his branch line with Annie and Clarabel. He was feeling very pleased with himself. "Hello, Thomas," whistled Percy. "You look splendid." "Yes, indeed," boasted Thomas. "Blue is the only proper color for an engine." "Oh, I don't know. I like my brown paint," said Toby. "I've always been green. I wouldn't want to be any other color either," added Percy. Well, anyway, huffed Thomas, "blue is the only color for a really useful engine. Everyone knows that." Percy said no more. He just grinned at Toby. Later, Thomas was resting when Percy arrived. A large hopper was loading his trucks full of coal. Thomas was still being cheeky. "Careful," he warned. "Watch out with those silly trucks." Go on, go on," muttered the trucks. "And by the way," went on Thomas, "those buffers don't look very safe to me." The last load poured down. "Help! I'm choking!" cried Thomas. "Get me out!" Percy was worried, but he couldn't help laughing. Thomas's smart blue paint was covered in coal dust from smoke box to bunker. "Ha ha," chuckled Percy. "You don't look really useful now, Thomas. You look really disgraceful." "I'm not disgraceful," choked Thomas. "You did that on purpose. Get me out." It took so long to clean Thomas that he wasn't in time for his next train. Toby had to take Annie and Clarabel. "Poor Thomas," whispered Annie to Clarabel. They were most upset. Thomas was grumpy in the shed that night. Toby thought it a great joke, but Percy was cross with Thomas for thinking he had made his paint dirty on purpose. Fancy a really useful blue engine like Thomas becoming a disgrace to the Fat Controller's railway. Next day, Thomas was feeling more cheerful as he watched Percy bring his trucks from the junction. The trucks were heavy and Percy was tired. "Have a drink," said his driver, "then you'll feel better." The water column stood at the end of the siding with the unsafe buffers. Suddenly, Percy found that he couldn't stop. The buffers didn't stop him either. "Oh!" wailed Percy. "Help!" The buffers were broken and Percy was wheel-deep in coal. It was time for Thomas to leave. He had seen everything. "Now Percy has learned his lesson too," he chuckled to himself. That night, the two engines made up their quarrel. "I didn't cause your accident on purpose, Thomas," whispered Percy. "You do know that, don't you?" "Of course," replied Thomas, "and I'm sorry I was cheeky. Your green paint looks splendid again, too. In future, we'll both be more careful of coal."
Oh yes, it's great to be an engine as you're steaming along. Puff, puff, puffing along. Beep, beep, beeping along. Fly along the rails as your wheels go round. Whiz, whiz, whizzing around.
every year on the date of the accident, it runs again as a warning to others, plunging into the gap, shrieking like a lost soul. Percy, what are you talking about? The ghost train. Driver saw it last night. Where? Asked Thomas and Toby. He didn't say. Oh, it makes my wheels wobble to think of it. Huh, said Thomas. You're just a silly little engine. I'm not scared. Thomas didn't believe in your ghost, said Percy next morning. His driver laughed. Neither do I. It was a pretend ghost on television. Percy was disappointed. That evening, he came back from the harbour. Percy knew where he was, even in the dark. Crow's Farm Crossing. We shan't be long now. He liked running at night. The rails hummed and the signal lights shone green. But a broken cartload of lime lay ahead. Sam the farmer had just gone for help. Percy broke the cart to smithereens. Lime flew everywhere. He puffed quickly to the nearest signal box. Percy's driver explained what had happened. I'll see to it, said the signalman, but you'd better clean Percy, or people will think he's a ghost. Percy chuckled. Do let's pretend I'm a ghost and scare Thomas. That'll teach him to say I'm a silly little engine. Toby promised to help. Thomas was being oiled up for his evening train. Percy's had an accident, cried Toby. Poor engine, said Thomas. Botheration! That means I'll be late. They've cleared the line for you, but there's something worse. Out with it, Toby. I can't wait all evening. I've just seen something, said Toby. It looked like Percy's ghost. It said it was coming here to warn us. Huh! Who cares? Don't be frightened, Toby. I'll take care of you. Pee, pee, pip, 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 pee. Let me in! Let me in! Wailed Percy. No, no, not by the smoke of my chimney, chim. I'll chuff and I'll puff and I'll break your door in. Oh dear, exclaimed Thomas. It's getting late. Oh, I'd no idea. Oh, I must find Annie and Clarabel. It was morning when Thomas returned. Where have you been? Asked Toby. Ah, well, said Thomas. I knew you'd be sad about Percy, and I didn't like to intrude. I slept in the goods shed, and... Oh, sorry, can't stop. Got to see a coach about to train. Percy was none the worse for his adventure, and was still enjoying himself enormously. He had heard everything. Well, well, well. What do you know about that? Anyone would think, chuckled Toby, that our Thomas had just seen a ghost.
All day. It doesn't matter, come rain or shine. There's always things for us to do.
Percy works in the yard at the big station. He loves playing jokes, but they can get him into trouble. One morning, he was very cheeky indeed. Beep, beep! Hurry up, Gordon. The train's ready. Gordon thought he was late. Ha 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 ha! laughed Percy, and showed him a train of dirty coal cars. Gordon thought how to get back at Percy for teasing him. Next, it was James's turn. "Stay in the shed today, James. Sir Topham Hatt will come and see you." Ah, thought James, Sir Topham Hatt knows I'm a fine engine. He wants me to pull a special train. James's driver and fireman could not make him move. The other engines grumbled dreadfully. They had to do James's work as well as their own. At last, the inspector arrived. "Show a wheel, James. You can't stay here all day." "Sir Topham Hatt told me to stay here. He sent a message this morning." "He did not. How could he? He's away for a week." "Oh," said James. "Oh,
Where's Percy?"
Percy had wisely disappeared. When Sir Topham Hatt came back, he was cross with James and Percy for causing so much trouble. But the very next day, Percy was still being cheeky. "I say, you engines, I'm to take some freight cars to Thomas's Junction. Sir Topham Hatt chose me especially. He must know I'm a really useful engine."
"More likely he wants you out of the way,"
grunted James. Gordon looked across to James. They were going to play a trick on Percy.
"James and I were just speaking about signals at the junction. We can't be too careful about signals, but then I needn't say that to a really useful engine like you, Percy."
Percy felt flattered.
"We had spoken of backing signals,"
put in James.
"They need extra special care, you know. Would you like me to explain?"
"No, thank you, James," said Percy. "I know all about signals." Percy was a little worried. "I wonder what backing signals are," he thought. "Never mind, I'll manage." He puffed crossly to his freight cars and felt better. He came to a signal.
"Bother! It's a danger."
The signal moved to show line clear. Its arm moved up instead of down. Percy had never seen that sort of signal before. Down means go, and up means stop. So upper still must mean go back. I know, it's one of those backing signals.
"Come on, Percy,"
said his driver.
"Off we go." "Stop! You're going the wrong way."
"But it's a backing signal," Percy protested and told him about Gordon and James. The driver laughed and explained. "Oh, dear," said Percy. "Let's start quickly before they see us." He was too late. Gordon saw everything. That night, the big engines talked about signals. They thought the subject was funny. Percy thought they were being very silly.
And in the cold, cold winter time, we're ready. When you light the fire and stoke the boiler, and we'll be there for you.
Percy worked hard at the new harbor. The workmen needed stone for their building. Toby helped, but sometimes the loads of stone were too heavy, and Percy had to fetch them for himself. Sometimes he'd see Thomas. "Well done, Percy. Sir Topham Hatt is very pleased with us." An airfield was close by. Percy heard the airplanes zooming overhead all day. The noisiest of all was a helicopter. "Silly thing," said Percy. "Why can't it go and buzz somewhere else?" One day, Percy stopped at the airfield. Hello, said Percy. Who are you? I'm Harold. Who are you? I'm Percy. What whirly great arms you've got. They're nice arms, said Harold. I can hover like a bird. Don't you wish you could hover? Certainly not. I like my rails, thank you. I think railways are slow, said Harold. They're not much use and quite out of date. He whirled his arms and buzzed away. Percy found Toby at the quarry. I say, Toby, that Harold, that stuck-up whirlybird thing, says I'm slow and out of date. Just let him wait. I'll show him. He collected his freight cars and started off, still fuming. Soon they heard a familiar buzzing. Percy, whispered his driver. There's Harold. He's not far ahead. Let's race him. Yes, let's, said Percy. Percy pounded along. The cars screamed and swayed. Well, I'll be a ding-dong-dang, said the driver. There was Harold. The race was on. Go it, Percy, he yelled. You're gaining. Percy had never been allowed to run fast before. He was having the time of his life. Hurry, 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 he panted to the cars. We don't want to, they grumbled. It was no use. Percy was bucketing along with flying wheels and Harold was high and alongside. The fireman shoveled for dear life. Well done, Percy, shouted the driver. We're gaining. We're going ahead. Oh, good boy, good boy. A distant signal warned them that the harbor wharf was near. Beep, beep, beep. Brakes, conductor, please. The driver carefully checked the train's headlong speed. They rolled under the main line and halted on the wharf. Oh dear, groaned Percy. I'm sure we've lost. The fireman scrambled to the cab roof. We've won! We've won! He shouted. Harold's still hovering. He's looking for a place to land. Listen, boys, the fireman called. Here's a song for Percy. Said Harold the helicopter to our Percy, you are slow. Your railway is out of date and not much use, you know. But Percy and his stone cars did the trip in record time, and we beat the helicopter on our old branch line. Percy loved it. Oh, thank you, he said. He liked the last line best of all, and was a very happy engine.
Then he heard Boulder. "Oh no, heading straight for me!" squeaked Percy.